Section 14. Moll Flanders. The first sensible reflect I made was that my husband was not by to see my disorder, and that I was very glad of it. The gentlemen had not been long in the house, but they came to the window of their room, as is usual, but my window was shut, you may be sure. However, I could not keep from peeping at them, and there I saw him again, heard him call out to one of the servants of the house for something he wanted, and received all the terrifying confirmations of its being the same person that were possible to be had. My next concern was to know, if possible, what was his business there, but that was impossible. Sometimes my imagination formed an idea of one frightful thing, sometimes of another. Sometimes I thought he had discovered me, and was come to upbraid me with ingratitude and breach of honour, and every moment I fancied he was coming up the stairs to insult me, and innumerable fancies came into my head of what was never in his head, nor ever could be, unless the devil had revealed it to him. I remained in this fright nearly 2 hours, and scarce ever kept my eye from the window or door of the inn where they were. At last, hearing a great clatter in the passage of their inn, I ran to the window, and to my great satisfaction saw them all three go out again and travel on westward. Had they gone towards London, I should have been still in a fright lest I should meet him on the road again, and that he should know me, but he went the contrary way, and so I was eased of that disorder. We resolved to be going the next day, but about 6 o'clock at night we were alarmed with a great uproar in the street, and people riding as if they had been out of their wits. And what was it but a hue and cry after 3 highwaymen that had robbed 2 coaches and some other travellers near Dunstable Hill, and notice had, it seems, been given that they had been seen at Brick Hill at such a house, meaning the house where those gentlemen had been. The house was immediately beset and searched, but there were witnesses enough that the gentlemen had been gone over 3 hours. The crowd having gathered about, we had the news presently, and I was heartily concerned now another way. I presently told the people of the house that I durst to say those were not the persons, for that I knew one of the gentlemen to be a very honest person, and of a good estate in Lancashire. The constable who came with the hue and cry was immediately informed of this, and came over to me to be satisfied from my own mouth, and I assured him that I saw the 3 gentlemen as I was at the window, that I saw them afterwards at the windows of the room they dined in, that I saw them afterwards take horse, and I could assure him I knew one of them to be such a man that he was a gentleman of a very good estate, and an undoubted character in Lancashire, from whence I was just now upon my journey. The assurance with which I delivered this gave the mob gentry a check, and gave the constable such satisfaction that he immediately sounded a retreat, told his people these were not the men, but that he had an account that they were very honest gentlemen, and so they all went back again. What the truth of the matter was I knew not, but certain it was that the coaches were robbed at Dunstable Hill, and £560 in money taken. Besides, some of the lace merchants that always travel that way had been visited too. As to the 3 gentlemen, that remains to be explained hereafter. Well, this alarm stopped us another day, though my spouse was for travelling, and told me it was always safest travelling after a robbery, for that the thieves were sure to be gone far enough off when they had alarmed the country. But I was afraid and uneasy, and indeed principally lest my old acquaintance should be upon the road still, and should chance to see me. I never lived 4 pleasanter days together in my life. I was a mere bride all this while, and my new spouse strove to make me entirely easy in everything. Oh, could this state of life have continued, how had all my past troubles been forgot, and my future sorrows avoided! But I had a past life of a most wretched kind to account for, some of it in this world as well as in another. We came away the 5th day, and my landlord, because he saw me uneasy, mounted himself, his son, and 3 honest country fellows with good firearms, and without telling us of it, followed the coach, and would see us safe into Dunstable. We could do no less than treat them very handsomely at Dunstable, which cost my spouse about 10 or 12 shillings, and something he gave the men for their time too, but my landlord would take nothing for himself. This was the most happy contrivance for me that could have fallen out, for had I come to London unmarried, I must either have come to him for the first night's entertainment, or have discovered to him that I had not one acquaintance in the whole city of London that could receive a poor bride for the first night's lodging with her spouse. But now, being an old married woman, I made no scruple of going directly home with him, and there I took possession at once of a house well furnished, and a husband in very good circumstances, so that I had a prospect of a very happy life if I knew how to manage it, and I had leisure to consider of the real value of the life I was likely to live. How different it was to be from the loose, ungoverned part I had acted before, and how much happier a life of virtue and sobriety is than that which we call a life of pleasure. Oh, had this particular scene of life lasted, or had I learned from that time I enjoyed it to have tasted the true sweetness of it, and had I not fallen into that poverty which is the sure bane of virtue, how happy had I been, not only here, but perhaps for ever! For while I lived thus, I was really a penitent for all my life past. I looked back on it with abhorrence, and might truly be said to hate myself for it. I often reflected how my lover at the bath, struck at the hand of God, repented and abandoned me, and refused to see me any more, though he loved me to an extreme. But I, prompted by that worst of devils, poverty, returned to the vile practice, and made the advantage of what they call a handsome face to be the relief to my necessities, and beauty be a pimp to vice. Now I seemed landed in a safe harbour, after the stormy voyage of life past was at an end, and I began to be thankful for my deliverance. I sat many an hour by myself, and wept over the remembrance of past follies, and the dreadful extravagance of a wicked life, and sometimes I flattered myself that I had sincerely repented. But there are temptations which it is not in the power of human nature to resist, and few know what would be their case if driven to the same exigencies. As covetousness is the root of all evil, so poverty is, I believe, the worst of all snares. But I waive that discourse till I come to an experiment. I lived with this husband with the utmost tranquillity. He was a quiet, sensible, sober man, virtuous, modest, sincere, and in his business diligent and just. His business was in a narrow compass, and his income sufficient to a plentiful way of living in the ordinary way. I do not say to keep an equipage and make a figure, as the world calls it, nor did I expect it or desire it, for as I abhorred the levity and extravagance of my former life, so I chose now to live retired, frugal, and within ourselves. I kept no company, made no visits, minded my family, and obliged my husband, and this kind of life became a pleasure to me. We lived in an uninterrupted course of ease and content for 5 years, when a sudden blow from an almost invisible hand blasted all my happiness, and turned me out into the world in a condition the reverse of all that had been before it. My husband, having trusted one of his fellow clerks with a sum of money, too much for our fortunes to bear the loss of, the clerk failed, and the loss fell very heavy on my husband. Yet it was not so great neither, but that, if he had had spirit and courage to have looked his misfortunes in the face, his credit was so good that, as I told him, he would easily recover it, for to sink under trouble is to double the weight, and he that will die in it shall die in it. It was in vain to speak comfortably to him. The wound had sunk too deep. It was a stab that touched the vitals. He grew melancholy and disconsolate, and from thence lethargic, and died. I foresaw the blow, and was extremely oppressed in my mind, for I saw evidently that if he died, I was undone. I had had 2 children by him, and no more, for, to tell the truth, it began to be time for me to leave bearing children, for I was now 48, and I suppose if he had lived I should have had no more. I was now left in a dismal and disconsolate case indeed, and in several things worse than ever. First, it was past the flourishing time with me, when I might expect to be courted for a mistress. That agreeable part had declined some time, and the ruins only appeared of what had been. And that which was worse than all this, that I was the most dejected, disconsolate creature alive. I, that had encouraged my husband, and endeavoured to support his spirits under his trouble, could not support my own. I wanted that spirit in trouble which I told him was so necessary to him for bearing the burthen. But my case was indeed deplorable, for I was left perfectly friendless and helpless, and the loss my husband had sustained had reduced his circumstances so low that, though indeed I was not in debt, yet I could easily foresee that what was left would not support me long, that while it wasted daily for subsistence, I had not way to increase it 1 shilling, so that it would be soon all spent, and then I saw nothing before me but the utmost distress, and this represented itself so lively to my thoughts that it seemed as if it was come before it was really very near. Also my very apprehensions doubled the misery, for I fancied every sixpence that I paid for a loaf of bread was the last that I had in the world, and that tomorrow I was to fast and be starved to death. In this distress I had no assistant, no friend to comfort or advise me. I sat and cried and tormented myself night and day, wringing my hands, and sometimes raving like a distracted woman, and indeed I have often wondered if it had not affected my reason, for I had the vapours to such a degree that my understanding was sometimes quite lost in fancies and imaginations. I lived 2 years in this dismal condition, wasting that little I had, weeping continually over my dismal circumstances, and, as it were, only bleeding to death without the least hope or prospect of help from God or man. And now I had cried too long and so often that tears were, as I might say, exhausted, and I began to be desperate, for I grew poor apace. For a little relief I had put off my house and took lodgings, but as I was reducing my living, so I sold off most of my goods, which put a little money in my pocket, and I lived near a year upon that, spending very sparingly and eking things out to the utmost. But still, when I looked before me, my very heart would sink within me at the inevitable approach of misery and want. Oh, let none read this part without seriously reflecting on the circumstances of a desolate state, and how they would grapple with mere want of friends and want of bread. It will certainly make them think, not of sparing what they have only, but of looking up to heaven for support, and of the wise man's prayer, "Give me not poverty, lest I steal." Let them remember that a time of distress is a time of dreadful temptation, and all the strength to resist is taken away. Poverty presses, the soul is made desperate by distress, and what can be done? It was one evening, when being brought, as I may say, to the last gasp, I think I may truly say I was distracted and raving, when prompted by I know not what spirit, and, as it were, doing I did not know what or why, I dressed me, for I had still pretty good clothes, and went out. I am very sure I had no manner of design in my head when I went out. I neither knew nor considered where to go, or on what business, but as the devil carried me out and laid his bait for me, so he brought me, to be sure, to the place, for I knew not whither I was going, or what I did. Wandering thus about, I knew not whither, I passed by an apothecary's shop in Leadenhall Street, where I saw lie on a stool just before the counter a little bundle wrapped in a white cloth. Beyond it stood a maid-servant with her back to it, looking towards the top of the shop, where the apothecary's apprentice, as I suppose, was standing upon the counter, with his back also to the door, and a candle in his hand, looking and reaching up to the upper shelf for something he wanted, so that both were engaged mighty earnestly, and nobody else in the shop. This was the bait, and the devil who had laid the snare as readily prompted me as if he had spoke, for I remember, and shall never forget it, 'twas like a voice spoken to me over my shoulder, "Take the bundle, be quick, do it this moment." It was no sooner said, but I stepped into the shop, and with my back to the wench, as if I had stood up for a cart that was going by, I put my hand behind me and took the bundle, and went off with it, the maid or the fellow not perceiving me, or any one else. It is impossible to express the horror of my soul all the while I did it. When I went away I had no heart to run, or scarce to mend my pace. I crossed the street, indeed, and went down the first turning I came to, and I think it was a street that went through into Fenchurch Street. From thence I crossed and turned through so many ways and turnings that I could never tell which way it was, nor where I went, for I felt not the ground I stepped on, and the farther I was out of danger, the faster I went, till, tired and out of breath, I was forced to sit down on a little bench at a door, and then I began to recover, and found I was got into Thames Street near Billingsgate. I rested me a little and went on. My blood was all in a fire. My heart beat as if I was in a sudden fright. In short, I was under such a surprise that I still knew not whither I was going or what to do. After I had tired myself thus with walking a long way about, and so eagerly, I began to consider and make home to my lodging, where I came about 9 o'clock at night. When the bundle was made up for, or on what occasion laid where I found it, I knew not, but when I came to open it, I found there was a suit of child-bed linen in it, very good and almost new, the lace very fine. There was a silver porringer of a pint, a small silver mug, and 6 spoons, with some other linen, a good smock, and 3 silk handkerchiefs, and in the mug, wrapped up in a paper, 18 shillings and 6pence in money. All the while I was opening these things, I was under such dreadful impressions of fear and such terror of mind, though I was perfectly safe, that I cannot express the manner of it. I sat me down and cried most vehemently. "Lord," said I, "what am I now? A thief? Why, I should be taken next time and be carried to Newgate and tried for my life." And with that I cried again a long time, and I am sure, as poor as I was, if I had durst for fear, I would certainly have carried the things back again, but that went off after a while. Well, I went to bed for that night, but slept little. The horror of the fact was upon my mind, and I knew not what I said or did all night and all the next day. Then I was impatient to hear some news of the loss, and would fain know how it was, whether they were a poor body's goods or a rich. "Perhaps," said I, "it may be some poor widow like me that had packed up these goods to go and sell them for a little bread for herself and a poor child, and are now starving and breaking their hearts for want of that little they would have fetched." And this thought tormented me worse than all the rest for 3 or 4 days' time. But my own distress silenced all these reflections, and the prospect of my own starving, which grew every day more frightful to me, hardened my heart by degrees. It was then particularly heavy upon my mind that I had been reformed, and had, as I hoped, repented of all my past wickedness, that I had lived a sober, grave, retired life for several years, but now I should be driven by the dreadful necessity of my circumstances to the gates of destruction, soul and body, and 2 or 3 times I fell upon my knees, praying to God, as well as I could, for deliverance. But I cannot but say my prayers had no hope in them. I knew not what to do. It was all fear without and dark within, and I reflected on my past life as not sincerely repented of, that heaven was now beginning to punish me on this side the grave, and would make me as miserable as I had been wicked. Had I gone on here, I had perhaps been a true penitent, but I had an evil counsellor within, and he was continually prompting me to relieve myself by the worst means. So one evening he tempted me again by the same wicked impulse that had said, "Take that bundle," to go out again and seek for what might happen. I went out now by daylight, and wandered about I knew not whither, and in search of I knew not what, when the devil put a snare in my way of a dreadful nature indeed, and such a one as I have never had before or since. Going through Aldergate Street, there was a pretty little child who had been at a dancing school, and was going home all alone, and my prompter, like a true devil, set me upon this innocent creature. I talked to it, and it prattled to me again, and I took it by the hand and led it along till it came to a paved alley that goes into Bartholomew Close, and I led it in there. The child said that that was not its way home. I said, "Yes, my dear, it is. I'll show you the way home." The child had a little necklace on of gold beads, and I had my eye upon that, and in the dark of the alley I stooped, pretending to mend the child's clog that was loose, and took off her necklace, and the child never felt it, and so led the child on again. Here, I say, the devil put me upon killing the child in the dark alley, that it might not cry, but the very thought frightened me so that I was ready to drop down, but I turned the child about, and bade it go back again, for that was not its way home. The child said so she would, and I went through the Bartholomew Close, and then turned round to another passage that goes into St. John Street. Then, coming into Smithfield, went down Chick Lane and into Field Lane to Holborn Bridge, when, mixing with the crowds of people usually passing there, it was not possible to have been found out, and thus I enterprised my second sally into the world. The thoughts of this booty put out all the thoughts of the first, and the reflections I had made wore quickly off. Poverty, as I have said, hardened my heart, and my own necessities made me regardless of anything. The last affair left no great concern upon me, for as I did the poor child no harm, I only said to myself I had given the parents a just reproof for their negligence in leaving the poor little lamb to come home by itself, and it would teach them to take more care of it another time. This string of beads was worth about 12 or 14 pounds. I suppose it might have been formerly the mother's, for it was too big for the child's wear, but that perhaps the vanity of the mother to have her child look fine at the dancing school had made her let the child wear it, and no doubt the child had a maid sent to take care of it, but she, careless jade, was taken up perhaps with some fellow that had met her by the way, and so the poor baby wandered till it fell into my hands. However, I did the child no harm. I did not so much as fright it, for I had a great many tender thoughts about me yet, and did nothing but what, as I may say, mere necessity drove me to. I had a great many adventures after this, but I was young in the business, and did not know how to manage otherwise than as the devil put things into my head, and indeed he was seldom backward to me. One adventure I had which was very lucky to me. I was going through Lombard Street in the dusk of the evening, just by the end of Three King Court, when on a sudden comes a fellow running by me as swift as lightning, and throws a bundle that was in his hand just behind me, as I stood up against the corner of the house at the turning into the alley. Just as he threw it in, he said, "God bless you, mistress, let it lie there a little," and away he runs, swift as the wind. After him comes two more, and immediately a young fellow without his hat, crying, "Stop thief!" and after him 2 or 3 more. They pursued the 2 last fellows so close that they were forced to drop what they had got, and one of them was taken into the bargain, and the other got off free. I stood stock still all this while, till they came back, dragging the poor fellow they had taken, and lugging the things they had found, extremely well satisfied that they had recovered the booty and taken the thief, and thus they passed by me, for I looked only like one who stood up while the crowd was gone. Once or twice I asked what was the matter, but the people neglected answering me, and I was not very importunate. But after the crowd was wholly past, I took my opportunity to turn about and take up what was behind me and walk away. This indeed I did with less disturbance than I had done formerly, for these things I did not steal, but they were stolen to my hands. I got safe to my lodgings with this cargo, which was a piece of fine black lustring silk, and a piece of velvet. The latter was but part of a piece of about 11 yards. The former was a whole piece of near 50 yards. It seems it was a mercer's shop that they had rifled. I say rifled, because the goods were so considerable that they had lost, for the goods they had recovered were pretty many, and I believe came to about 6 or 7 several pieces of silk. How they came to get so many I could not tell, but as I had only robbed the thief, I made no scruple at taking these goods, and being very glad of them too. I had pretty good luck thus far, and I made several adventures more, though with but small purchase, yet with good success, but I went in daily dread that some mischief would befall me, and that I should certainly come to be hanged at last. The impression this made on me was too strong to be slighted, and it kept me from making attempts that, for aught I knew, might have been very safely performed. But one thing I cannot admit, which was a bait to me many a day. I walked frequently out into the village round the town to see if nothing would fall into my way there, and going by a house near Stepney, I saw on the window board 2 rings, one a small diamond ring, and the other a gold ring, to be sure laid there by some thoughtless lady that had more money than forecast, perhaps only till she washed her hands. I walked several times by the window to observe if I could see whether there was anybody in the room or no, and I could see nobody, but still I was not sure. It came presently into my thoughts to rap at the glass, as if I wanted to speak with somebody, and if anybody was there they would be sure to come to the window, and then I would tell them to remove those rings, for that I had seen 2 suspicious fellows take notice of them. This was a ready thought. I rapped once or twice, and nobody came, when, seeing the coast clear, I thrust hard against the square of the glass, and broke it with very little noise, and took out the 2 rings, and walked away with them very safe. The diamond ring was worth about £3, the other about 9 shillings. I was now at a loss for a market for my goods, and especially for my 2 pieces of silk. I was very loath to dispose of them for a trifle, as the poor unhappy thieves in general do, who, after they have ventured their lives for perhaps a thing of value, are fain to sell it for a song when they have done. But I was resolved I would not do this, whatever shift I made, unless I was driven to the last extremity. However, I did not well know what course to take. At last I resolved to go to my old governess and acquaint myself with her again. I had punctually supplied the £5 a year to her for my little boy as long as I was able, but at last was obliged to put a stop to it. However, I had written a letter to her, wherein I had told her that my circumstances were reduced very low, that I had lost my husband, and that I was not able to do it any longer, and so begged that the poor child might not suffer too much for its mother's misfortunes. I now made her a visit, and I found that she drove something of the old trade still, but that she was not in such flourishing circumstances as before, for she had been sued by a certain gentleman who had had his daughter stolen from him, and who, it seems, she had helped to convey away, and it was very narrowly that she escaped the gallows. The expense also had ravaged her, and she was become very poor. Her house was but meanly furnished, and she was not in such a repute for her practice as before. However, she stood upon her legs, as they say, and as she was a stirring, bustling woman, and had some stock left, she was turned pawnbroker, and lived pretty well. She received me very civilly, and with her usual obliging manner told me she would not have the less respect for me for my being reduced, that she had taken care my boy was very well looked after, though I could not pay for him, and that the woman that had him was easy, so that I needed not to trouble myself about him till I might be better able to do it effectually. I told her that I had not much money left, but that I had some things that were money's worth, if she could tell me how I might turn them into money. She asked me what it was I had. I pulled out the string of gold beads, and told her it was one of my husband's presents to me. Then I showed her the 2 parcels of silk, which I told her I had from Ireland and brought up to town with me, and the little diamond ring. As to the small parcel of plate and spoons, I had found means to dispose of them myself before, and as for the child-bed linen I had, she offered me to take it herself, believing it to have been my own. She told me that she was turned pawnbroker, and that she would sell those things for me as pawn to her, and so she sent presently for proper agents that bought them, being in her hands, without any scruple, and gave good prices too. I now began to think this necessary woman might help me a little in my low condition to some business, for I would gladly have turned my hand to any honest employment if I could have got it. But here she was deficient. Honest business did not come within her reach. If I had been younger, perhaps she might have helped me to a spark, but my thoughts were off that kind of livelihood, as being quite out of the way after 50, which was my case, and so I told her. She invited me at last to come and be at her house till I could find something to do, and it should cost me very little, and this I gladly accepted of. And now, living a little easier, I entered into some measures to have my own little son by my last husband taken off, and this she made easy too, reserving a payment only of £5 a year if I could pay it. This was such a help to me that for a good while I left off the wicked trade that I had so newly taken up, and gladly I would have got my bread by the help of my needle if I could have got work, but that was very hard to do for one that had no manner of acquaintance in the world. However, at last I got some quilting work for ladies' beds, petticoats, and the like, and this I liked very well, and worked very hard, and with this I began to live. But the diligent devil, who resolved I should continue in his service, continually prompted me to go out and take a walk, that is to say, to see if anything would offer in the old way. One evening I blindly obeyed his summons, and fetched a long circuit through the streets, but met with no purchase, and came home very weary and empty. But not content with that, I went out the next evening too, when going by an alehouse I saw the door of a little room open, next the very street, and on the table a silver tankard, things very much in use in public houses at that time. It seemed some company had been drinking there, and the careless boys had forgot to take it away. I went into the box frankly, and setting the silver tankard on the corner of the bench, I sat down before it and knocked with my foot. A boy came presently, and I bade him fetch me a pint of warm ale, for it was cold weather. The boy ran, and I heard him go down the cellar to draw the ale. While the boy was gone, another boy came into the room and cried, "D'ye call?" I spoke with a melancholy air and said, "No, child, the boy has gone for a pint of ale for me." While I sat there, I heard the woman in the bar say, "Are they all gone in the 5?" which was the box I sat in, and the boy said, "Yes." "Who fetched the tankard away?" says the woman. "I did," says another boy. "That's it," pointing, it seems, to another tankard, which he had fetched from another box by mistake, or else it must be that the rogue forgot that he had not brought it in, which certainly he had not. I heard all this, much to my satisfaction, for I found plainly that the tankard was not missed, and yet they concluded it was fetched away. So I drank my ale, called to pay, and as I went away I said, "Take care of your plate, child," meaning a silver pint mug which he brought me drink in. The boy said, "Yes, madam, very welcome," and away I came. I came home to my governess, and now I thought it was a time to try her, that if I might be put to the necessity of being exposed, she might offer me some assistance. When I had been at home some time, and had an opportunity of talking to her, I told her I had a secret of the greatest consequence in the world to commit to her, if she had respect enough for me to keep it a secret. She told me she had kept one of my secrets faithfully. Why should I doubt her keeping another? I told her the strangest thing in the world had befallen me, and that it had made a thief of me, even without any design, and so told her the whole story of the tankard. "And have you brought it away with you, my dear?" says she. "To be sure I have," says I, and I showed it her. "But what shall I do now?" says I. "Must not carry it again?" "Carry it again," says she. "Aye, if you are minded to be sent to Newgate for stealing it." "Why," says I, "they can't be so base to stop me when I carry it to them again." "You don't know those sort of people, child," says she. "They'll not only carry you to Newgate, but hang you too, without any regard to the honesty of returning it, or bring in an account of all the other tankards they have lost for you to pay for." "What must I do then?" says I. "Nay," says she, "as you have played the cunning part and stole it, you must e'en keep it. There's no going back now. Besides, child," says she, "don't you want it more than they do? I wish you could light on such a bargain once a week." This gave me a new notion of my governess, and that since she was turned pawnbroker, she had a sort of people about her that were none of the honest ones that I had met with there before. I had not been long there, but I discovered it more plainly than before, for every now and then I saw hilts of swords, spoons, forks, tankards, and all such kind of ware brought in, not to be pawned, but to be sold downright, and she bought everything that came without asking any questions, but had very good bargains, as I found by her discourse. I found also that in following this trade she always melted down the plate she bought, that it might not be challenged, and she came to me and told me one morning that she was going to melt, and if I would, she would put my tankard in, that it might not be seen by anybody. I told her with all my heart, so she weighed it, and allowed me the full value in silver again, but I found she did not do the same to the rest of her customers. Some time after this, as I was at work and very melancholy, she begins to ask me what the matter was, as she was used to do. I told her my heart was heavy. I had little work and nothing to live on, and knew not what course to take. She laughed and told me I must go out again and try my fortune. It might be that I might meet with another piece of plate. "Oh, mother," says I, "that is a trade I have no skill in, and if I should be taken, I am undone at once." Says she, "I can help you to a schoolmistress that shall make you as dexterous as herself." I trembled at that proposal, for hitherto I had had no confederates nor any acquaintance among that tribe. But she conquered all my modesty and all my fears, and in a little time, by the help of this confederate, I grew as impudent a thief and as dexterous as ever Moll Cutpurse was, though if fame does not belie her, not half so handsome. The comrade she helped me to dealt in 3 sorts of craft, viz., shoplifting, stealing of shop books and pocket books, and taking off gold watches from the ladies' sides, and this last she did so dexterously that no woman ever arrived to the performance of that art so as to do it like her. I liked the first and the last of these things very well, and I attended her some time in the practice, just as a deputy attends to a midwife without any pay. At length she put me to practice. She had shown me her art, and I had several times unhooked a watch from her own side with great dexterity. At last she showed me a prize, and this was a young lady, big with child, who had a charming watch. The thing was to be done as she came out of church. She goes on one side of the lady and pretends, just as she came to the steps, to fall, and fell against the lady with so much violence as put her into a great fright, and both cried out terribly. In the very moment that she jostled the lady, I had hold of the watch, and holding it the right way, the start she gave drew the hook out, and she never felt it. I made off immediately, and left my schoolmistress to come out of her pretended fright gradually, and the lady too, and presently the watch was missed. "Ay," says my comrade, "then it was those rogues that thrust me down, I warrant ye. I wonder the gentlewoman did not miss her watch before, then we might have taken them." She humoured the thing so well that nobody suspected her, and I was got home a full hour before her. This was my first adventure in company. The watch was indeed a very fine one, and had a great many trinkets about it, and my governess allowed us £20 for it, of which I had half. And thus I was entered a complete thief, hardened to the pitch above all the reflections of conscience or modesty, and to a degree which I must acknowledge I never thought possible in me. Thus the devil, who began by the help of an irresistible poverty to push me into this wickedness, brought me on to a height beyond the common rate, even when my necessities were not so great, or the prospect of my misery so terrifying, for I had now got into a little vein of work, and as I was not at a loss to handle my needle, it was very probable, as acquaintance came in, I might have got my bread honestly enough. I must say that if such a prospect of work had presented itself at first, when I began to feel the approach of my miserable circumstances, I say, had such a prospect of getting my bread by working presented itself then, I had never fallen into this wicked trade, or into such a wicked gang as I was now embarked with. But practice had hardened me, and I grew audacious to the last degree, and the more so because I had carried it on so long, and had never been taken. For, in a word, my new partner in wickedness and I went on together so long without ever being detected that we not only grew bold, but we grew rich, and we had at one time 21 gold watches in our hands. I remember that one day, being a little more serious than ordinary, and finding I had so good a stock beforehand as I had it, for I had near £200 in money for my share, it came strongly into my mind, no doubt from some kind spirit, if such there be, that at first poverty excited me, and my distresses drove me to these dreadful shifts. So seeing those distresses were now relieved, and I could also get something towards a maintenance by working, and had so good a bank to support me, why should I now not leave off, as they say, while I was well, that I could not expect to go always free, and if I was once surprised and miscarried, I was undone. This was doubtless the happy minute when, if I had hearkened to the blessed hint, from whatsoever it had come, I had still a cast for an easy life. But my fate was otherwise determined. The busy devil that so industriously drew me in had too fast hold of me to let me go back. But as poverty brought me into the mire, so avarice kept me in till there was no going back. As to the arguments which my reason dictated for persuading me to lay down, avarice stepped in and said, "Go on, go on. You have had a very good luck. Go on till you have gotten £400 or £500, and then you shall leave off, and then you may live easy without working at all." Thus I, that was once in the devil's clutches, was held fast there as with a charm, and had no power to go without the circle, till I was engulfed in labyrinths of trouble too great to get out at all. However, these thoughts left some impression upon me, and made me act with more caution than before, and more than my directors used for themselves. My comrade, as I called her, but rather she should have been called my teacher, with another of her scholars, was the first in the misfortune, for, happening to be upon the hunt for purchase, they made an attempt upon a linen draper in Cheapside, but were snapped by a hawk's-eye journeyman, and seized with 2 pieces of cambric, which were taken also upon them. This was enough to lodge them both in Newgate, where they had the misfortune to have some of their former sins brought to remembrance. 2 other indictments being brought against them, and the facts being proved upon them, they were both condemned to die. They both pleaded their bellies, and were both voted quick with child, though my tutoress was no more with child than I was. I went frequently to see them and condole with them, expecting that it would be my turn next, but the place gave me so much horror, reflecting that it was the place of my unhappy birth and of my mother's misfortunes, and that I could not bear it, so I was forced to leave off going to see them. And oh, could I have but taken warning by their disasters, I had been happy still, for I was yet free, and had nothing brought against me. But it could not be. My measure was not yet filled up. My comrade, having the brand of an old offender, was executed. The young offender was spared, having obtained a reprieve, but lay starving a long while in prison, till at last she got her name into what they call a circuit pardon, and so came off. This terrible example of my comrade frightened me heartily, and for a good while I made no excursions. But one night, in the neighbourhood of my governess's house, they cried, "Fire!" My governess looked out, for we were all up, and cried immediately that such a gentleman's house was all of a light, fire atop, and so indeed it was. Here she gives me a job. "Now, child," says she, "there is a rare opportunity, for the fire being so near that you may go to it before the street is blocked up with the crowd." She presently gave me my cue. "Go, child," says she, "to the house, and run in and tell the lady, or anybody you see, that you come to help them, and that you came from such a gentlewoman, that is one of her acquaintance farther up the street." She gave me the like cue to the next house, naming another name that was also an acquaintance of the gentlewoman of the house. Away I went, and coming to the house, I found them all in confusion, you may be sure. I ran in, and finding one of the maids, "Lord, sweetheart," says I, "how came this dismal accident? Where is your mistress, and how does she do? Is she safe? And where are the children? I come from Madam to help you." Away runs the maid. "Madam, madam," says she, screaming as loud as she could yell, "here is a gentlewoman come from Madam to help us." The poor woman, half out of her wits, with a bundle under her arm and 2 little children, comes towards me. "Lord, madam," says I, "let me carry the poor children to Madam. She desires you to send them. She'll take care of the poor lambs." And immediately I takes one of them out of her hand, and she lifts the other up into my arms. "I do, for God's sake," says she, "carry them to her. Oh, thank her for her kindness." "Have you anything else to secure, madam?" says I. "She will take care of it." "Oh dear, aye," says she, "God bless her and thank her. Take this bundle of plate and carry it to her too. Oh, she is a good woman. Oh, Lord, we are utterly ruined, utterly undone." And away she runs from me out of her wits, and the maids after her, and away comes I with the 2 children and the bundle. I was no sooner got into the street, but I saw another woman come to me. "Oh," says she, "mistress," in a piteous tone, "you will let fall the child. Come, this is a sad time, let me help you," and immediately lays hold of my bundle to carry it for me. "No," says I, "if you will help me, take the child by the hand and lead it for me, but to the upper end of the street. I'll go with you and satisfy you for your pains." She could not avoid going, after what I said, but the creature, in short, was one of the same business with me, and wanted nothing but the bundle. However, she went with me to the door, for she could not help it. When we were come there, I whispered her. "Go, child," said I understand your trade. You may meet with purchase enough." She understood me, and walked off. I thundered at the door with the children, and as the people were raised before by the noise of the fire, I was soon let in, and I said, "Is madam awake? Pray tell her Mrs. desires the favour of her to take the 2 children in. Poor lady, she will be undone. Their house is all of a flame." They took the children in very civilly, pitied the family in distress, and away came I with my bundle. One of the maids asked me if I was not to leave the bundle too. I said, "No, sweetheart, 'tis to go to another place. It does not belong to them." I was in a great way out of the hurry now, and so I went on, clear of anybody's inquiry, and brought the bundle of plate, which was very considerable, straight home, and gave it to my old governess. She told me she would not look into it, but bade me go out again to look for more. She gave me the like cue to the gentlewoman of the next house to that which was on fire, and I did my endeavour to go, but by this time the alarm of fire was so great, and so many engines playing, and the streets so thronged with people, that I could not get near the house, whatever I would do. So I came back again to my governess's, and taking the bundle up into my chamber, I began to examine it. It is with horror that I tell what a treasure I found there. 'Tis enough to say that besides most of the family plate, which was considerable, I found a gold chain, an old-fashioned thing, the locket of which was broken, so that I suppose it had not been used some years, but the gold was not the worse for that. Also a little box of burying rings, the lady's wedding ring, and some broken bits of old lockets of gold, a gold watch, and a purse with about £24 value in old pieces of gold coin, and several other things of value. This was the greatest and the worst prize that ever I was concerned in, for indeed, though, as I have said above, I was hardened now beyond the power of all reflection in other cases, yet it really touched me to the very soul when I looked into this treasure, to think of the poor disconsolate gentlewoman who had lost so much by the fire besides, and who would think, to be sure, that she had saved her plate and best things. How she would be surprised and afflicted when she should find that she had been deceived, and should find that the person that took her children and her goods had not come, as was pretended, from the gentlewoman in the next street, but that the children had been put upon her without her own knowledge. I say, I confess the inhumanity of this action moved me very much, and made me relent exceedingly, and tears stood in my eyes upon that subject. But, with all my sense of its being cruel and inhuman, I could never find in my heart to make any restitution. The reflection wore off, and I began quickly to forget the circumstances that attended the taking them. Nor was this all. For though by this job I was become considerably richer than before, yet the resolution I had formerly taken of leaving off this horrid trade when I had gotten a little more did not return, but I must still get farther and more, and the avarice joined so with the success that I had no more thought of coming to a timely alteration of life, though without it I could expect no safety, no tranquillity in the possession of what I had so wickedly gained, but a little more and a little more was the case still. At length, yielding to the importunities of my crime, I cast off all remorse and repentance, and all the reflections on that head turned to no more than this, that I might perhaps come to have one booty more that might complete my desires, but though I certainly had that one booty, yet every hit looked towards another, and was so encouraging me to go on with the trade, that I had no gust to the thought of laying it down. In this condition, hardened by success, and resolving to go on, I fell into the snare in which I was appointed to meet with my last reward for this kind of life. But even this was not yet, for I met with several successful adventures more in this way of being undone. I remained still with my governess, who was for a while really concerned for the misfortune of my comrade that had been hanged, and who, it seems, knew enough of my governess to have sent her the same way, and which made her very uneasy. Indeed, she was in a very great fright. It is true that when she was gone, and had not opened mouth to tell what she knew, my governess was easy as to that point, and perhaps glad she was hanged, for it was in her power to have obtained a pardon at the expense of her friends. But, on the other hand, the loss of her, and the sense of her kindness in not making her market of what she knew, moved my governess to mourn very sincerely for her. I comforted her as well as I could, and she, in return, hardened me to merit more completely the same fate. However, as I have said, it made me the more wary, and particularly I was very shy of shoplifting, especially among the mercers and drapers, who are a set of fellows that have their eyes very much about them. I made a venture or two among the lace folks and the milliners, and particularly at one shop where I got notice of two young women who were newly set up, and had not been bred to the trade. There, I think, I carried off a piece of bone lace worth £6 or £7, and a paper of thread. But this was but once. It was a trick that would not serve again. It was always reckoned a safe job when we heard of a new shop, and especially when the people were such as were not bred to shops. Such may depend upon it that they will be visited once or twice at their beginning, and they must be very sharp indeed if they can prevent it. I made another adventure or two, but they were but trifles too, though sufficient to live on. After this nothing considerable offering for a good while, I began to think that I must give over the trade in earnest, but my governess, who was not willing to lose me, and expected great things of me, brought me one day into company with a young woman and a fellow that went for her husband, though, as it appeared afterwards, she was not his wife, but they were partners, it seems, in the trade they carried on, and partners in something else. In short, they robbed together, lay together, were taken together, and at last were hanged together. I came into a kind of league with these two by the help of my governess, and they carried me out into 3 or 4 adventures, where I rather saw them commit some coarse and unhandy robberies, in which nothing but a great stock of impudence on their side, and gross negligence on the people's side who were robbed, could have made them successful. So I resolved from that time forward to be very cautious how I ventured upon anything with them, and indeed, when 2 or 3 unlucky projects were proposed by them, I declined the offer and persuaded them against it. One time they particularly proposed robbing a watchmaker of 3 gold watches which they had eyed in the daytime, and found the place where he laid them. One of them had so many keys of all kinds that he made no question to open the place where the watchmaker had laid them, and so we made a kind of an appointment. But when I came to look narrowly into the thing, I found they proposed breaking open the house, and this, as a thing out of my way, I would not embark in, so they went without me. They did get into the house by main force, and broke up the locked place where the watches were, but found but one of the gold watches, and a silver one which they took, and got out of the house again very clear. But the family, being alarmed, cried out, "Thieves!" and the man was pursued and taken. The young woman had got off too, but unhappily was stopped at a distance, and the watches found upon her. And thus I had a second escape, for they were convicted, and both were hanged, being old offenders, though but young people. As I said before, that they robbed together and lay together, so now they hanged together, and there ended my new partnership. I began now to be very wary, having so narrowly escaped a scouring, and having such an example before me. But I had a new tempter, who prompted me every day, I mean my governess, and now a prize presented, which, as it came by her management, so she expected a good share of the booty. There was a good quantity of Flanders lace lodged in a private house, where she had gotten intelligence of it, and Flanders lace being prohibited, it was a good booty to any custom-house officer that could come at it. I had a full account from my governess, as well of the quantity as of the very place where it was concealed, and I went to a custom-house officer and told him I had such a discovery to make to him of such a quantity of lace, if he would assure me that I should have my due share of the reward. This was so just an offer that nothing could be fairer, so he agreed, and taking a constable and me with him, we beset the house. As I told him I could go directly to the place, he left it to me, and the hole being very dark, I squeezed myself into it, with a candle in my hand, and so reached the pieces out to him, taking care as I gave him some, so to secure as much about myself as I could conveniently dispose of. There was near £300 worth of lace in the hole, and I secured about £50 worth of it to myself. The people of the house were not owners of the lace, but a merchant who had entrusted them with it, so that they were not so surprised as I thought they would be. I left the officer overjoyed with his prize, and fully satisfied with what he had got, and appointed to meet him at a house of his own directing, where I came after I had disposed of the cargo I had about me, of which he had not the least suspicion. When I came to him, he began to capitulate with me, believing I did not understand the right I had to a share in the prize, and would fain have put me off with £20, but I let him know that I was not so ignorant as he supposed I was, and yet I was glad too that he offered to bring me to a certainty. I asked £100, and he rose up to 30. I fell to £80, and he rose again to 40. In a word, he offered £50, and I consented, only demanding a piece of lace, which I thought came to about £8 or £9, as if it had been for my own wear, and he agreed to it. So I got £50 in money paid me that same night, and made an end of the bargain, nor did he ever know who I was, or where to inquire for me, so that if it had been discovered that part of the goods were embezzled, he could have made no challenge upon me for it. I very punctually divided this spoil with my governess, and I passed with her from this time for a very dexterous manager in the nicest cases. I found that this last was the best and easiest sort of work that was in my way, and I made it my business to inquire out prohibited goods, and after buying some, usually betrayed them. But none of these discoveries amounted to anything considerable, not like that I related just now. But I was willing to act safe, and was still cautious of running the great risks which I found others did, and in which they miscarried every day. The next thing of moment was an attempt at a gentlewoman's good watch. It happened in a crowd at a meeting-house, where I was in a very great danger of being taken. I had full hold of her watch, but giving a great jostle, as if somebody had thrust me against her, and in the juncture giving the watch a fair pull, I found it would not come, so I let it go that moment, and cried out as if I had been killed, that somebody had trod upon my foot, and that there were certainly pickpockets there, for somebody or other had given a pull at my watch. For you are to observe that on these adventures we always went very well dressed, and I had very good clothes on, and a gold watch by my side, as like a lady as other fold. I had no sooner said so, but the other gentlewoman cried out, "A pickpocket!" too, for somebody, she said, had tried to pull her watch away. When I touched her watch I was close to her, but when I cried out I stopped as it were short, and the crowd bearing her forward a little, she made a noise too, but it was at some distance from me, so that she did not in the least suspect me. But when she cried out, "A pickpocket!" somebody cried, "Aye, and here has been another. This gentlewoman has been attempted too." At that very instant, a little farther in the crowd, and very luckily too, they cried out, "A pickpocket!" again, and really seized a young fellow in the very act. This, though unhappy for the wretch, was very opportunely for my case, though I had carried it off handsomely enough before. But now it was out of doubt, and all the loose part of the crowd ran that way, and the poor boy was delivered up to the rage of the street, which is a cruelty I need not describe, and which, however, they are always glad of, rather than to be sent to Newgate, where they lie often a long time, till they are almost perished, and sometimes they are hanged, and the best they can look for, if they are convicted, is to be transported. This was a narrow escape to me, and I was so frightened that I ventured no more at gold watches a great while. There was indeed a great many concurring circumstances in this adventure which assisted in my escape, but the chief was that the woman whose watch I had pulled at was a fool. That is to say, she was ignorant of the nature of the attempt, which one would have thought she should not have been, seeing she was wise enough to fasten her watch so that it could not be slipped up. But she was in such a fright that she had no thought about her proper for the discovery, for she, when she felt the pull, screamed out, and pushed herself forward, and put all the people about her into disorder, and said not a word of her watch or of a pickpocket for at least 2 minutes' time, which was time enough for me and to spare. For as I had cried out behind her, as I have said, and bore myself back in the crowd as she bore forward, there were several people, at least 7 or 8, the throng being still moving on, that were got between me and her in that time, and then I crying out, "A pickpocket!" rather sooner than she, or at least as soon, she might as well be the person suspected as I, and the people were confused in their inquiry. Whereas had she, with a presence of mind needful on such an occasion, as soon as she felt the pull, not screamed out as she did, but turned immediately round and seized the next body that was behind her, she had infallibly taken me. This is a direction not of the kindest sort to the fraternity, but 'tis certainly a key to the clue of a pickpocket's motions, and whoever can follow it will as certainly catch the thief as he will be sure to miss if he does not. I had another adventure which puts this matter out of doubt, and which may be an instruction for posterity in the case of a pickpocket. My good old governess, to give a short touch at her history, though she had left off the trade, was, as I may say, born a pickpocket, and, as I understood afterwards, had run through all the several degrees of that art, and yet had never been taken but once, when she was so grossly detected that she was convicted and ordered to be transported. But being a woman of a rare tongue, and withal having money in her pocket, she found means, the ship putting into Ireland for provisions, to get on shore there, where she lived and practised her old trade for some years, when, falling into another sort of bad company, she turned midwife and procuress, and played 100 pranks there, which she gave me a little history of in confidence between us as we grew more intimate. And it was to this wicked creature that I owed all the art and dexterity I arrived to, in which there were few that ever went beyond me, or that practised so long without any misfortune. It was after those adventures in Ireland, and when she was pretty well known in that country, that she left Dublin and came over to England, where, the time of her transportation being not expired, she left her former trade for fear of falling into bad hands again, for then she was sure to have gone to wreck. Here she set up in the same trade she had followed in Ireland, in which she soon, by her admirable management and good tongue, arrived to the height which I have already described, and indeed began to be rich, though her trade fell off again afterwards, as I have hinted before. I mentioned thus much of the history of this woman here, the better to account for the concern she had in the wicked life I was now leading, into all the particulars of which she had led me, as it were, by the hand, and gave me such directions, and I so well followed them, that I grew the greatest artist of my time, and worked myself out of every danger with such dexterity, that when several more of my comrades ran themselves into Newgate presently, and by that time they had been half a year at the trade, I had now practised upwards of 5 years, and the people at Newgate did not so much as know me. They had heard much of me indeed, and often expected me there, but I always got off, though many times in the extremest danger. One of the greatest dangers I was now in was that I was too well known among the trade, and some of them, whose hatred was owing rather to envy than any injury I had done them, began to be angry that I should always escape when they were always catched and hurried to Newgate. These were they that gave me the name of Moll Flanders, for it was no more of affinity with my real name, or with any of the names I had ever gone by, than black is of kin to white, except that once, as before, I called myself Mrs. Flanders, when I sheltered myself in the Mint, but that these rogues never knew, nor could I ever learn how they came to give me the name, or what the occasion of it was. I was soon informed that some of these who were gotten fast into Newgate had vowed to impeach me, and as I knew that 2 or 3 of them were but too able to do it, I was under a great concern about it, and kept within doors for a good while. But my governess, whom I always made partner in my success, and who now played a sure game with me, for that she had a share of the gain and no share in the hazard, I say my governess was something impatient of my leading such a useless, unprofitable life, as she called it, and she laid a new contrivance for my going abroad, and this was to dress me up in men's clothes, and so put me into a new kind of practice. I was tall and personable, but a little too smooth-faced for a man. However, I seldom went abroad but in the night. It did well enough, but it was a long time before I could behave in my new clothes, I mean as to my craft. It was impossible to be so nimble, so ready, so dexterous at these things in a dress so contrary to nature, and I did everything clumsily, so I had neither the success nor the easiness of escape that I had before, and I resolved to leave it off, but that resolution was confirmed soon after by the following accident. As my governess disguised me like a man, so she joined me with a man, a young fellow that was nimble enough at his business, and for about 3 weeks we did very well together. Our principal trade was watching shopkeepers' counters, and slipping off any kind of goods we could see carelessly laid anywhere, and we made several good bargains, as we called them, at this work. And as we kept always together, so we grew very intimate, yet he never knew that I was not a man, nay, though I several times went home with him to his lodgings, according as our business directed, and 4 or 5 times lay with him all night. But our design lay another way, and it was absolutely necessary to me to conceal my sex for him, as appeared afterwards. The circumstances of our living, coming in late and having such and such business to do as required that nobody should be trusted with the comings into our lodgings, were such as made it impossible to me to refuse lying with him unless I would have owned my sex, and as it was, I effectually concealed myself. But his ill and my good fortune soon put an end to this life, which I must own I was sick of too on several other accounts. We had made several prizes in this new way of business, but the last would be extraordinary. There was a shop in a certain street which had a warehouse behind it that looked into another street, the house making the corner of the turning. Through the window of the warehouse we saw, lying on the counter or show-board, which was just below it, 5 pieces of silks, besides other stuffs, and though it was almost dark, yet the people, being busy in the fore-shop with customers, had not had time to shut up those windows, or else had forgot it. This the young fellow was so overjoyed with that he could not restrain himself. It lay all within his reach, he said, and he swore violently to me that he would have it if he broke down the house for it. I dissuaded him a little, but saw there was no remedy, so he ran rashly upon it, slipped out a square of the sash window dexterously enough and without noise, and got out 4 pieces of the silks, and came with them towards me, but was immediately pursued with a terrible clatter and noise. We were standing together indeed, but I had not taken any of the goods out of his hand, when I said to him hastily, "You're undone! Fly, for God's sake!" He ran like lightning, and I too, but the pursuit was hotter after him, because he had the goods, than after me. He dropped 2 of the pieces, which stopped them a little, but the crowd increased, and pursued us both. They took him soon after, with the other 2 pieces upon him, and then the rest followed me. I ran for it, and got into my governess's house, whither some quick-eyed people followed me so warmly as to fix me there. They did not immediately knock at the door, by which I got time to throw off my disguise and dress me in my own clothes. Besides, when they came there, my governess, who had her tale ready, kept her door shut, and called out to them, and told them there was no man come in there. The people affirmed there did a man come in there, and swore they would break open the door. My governess, not at all surprised, spoke calmly to them, told them they should very freely come and search her house, if they should bring a constable, and let in none but such as the constable would admit, for it was unreasonable to let in a whole crowd. This they could not refuse, though they were a crowd. So a constable was fetched immediately, and she very freely opened the door. The constable kept the door, and the men he appointed searched the house, my governess going with them from room to room. When she came to my room, she called to me, and said aloud, "Cousin, pray open the door. Here's some gentleman that must come and look into your room." I had a little girl with me, which was my governess's grandchild, as she called her, and I bade her open the door, and there I sat at work with a great litter of things about me, as if I had been at work all day, being myself quite undressed, with only night-clothes on my head, and a loose morning gown wrapped about me. My governess made a kind of excuse for their disturbing me, telling me partly the occasion of it, and that she had no remedy but to open the doors to them and let them satisfy themselves, for all she could say to them would not satisfy them. I sat still and bid them search the room if they pleased, for if there was anybody in the house I was sure they were not in my room, and as for the rest of the house, I had nothing to say to that. I did not understand what they looked for. Everything looked so innocent and so honest about me that they treated me civiller than I expected, but it was not till they had searched the room to a nicety, even under the bed, in the bed, and everywhere else where it was possible anything could be hid. When they had done this, and could find nothing, they asked my pardon for troubling me, and went down. When they had thus searched the house from bottom to top, and then top to bottom, and could find nothing, they appeased the mob pretty well, but they carried my governess before the justice. 2 men swore that they saw the man whom they pursued go into her house. My governess rattled and made a great noise that her house should be insulted, and that she should be used thus for nothing, that if a man did come in he might go out again presently for aught she knew, for she was ready to make oath that no man had been within her doors all that day as she knew of, and that was very true indeed. That it might be indeed that as she was above stairs, any fellow in a fright might find the door open and run in for shelter when he was pursued, but that she knew nothing of it, and if it had been so, he certainly went out again, perhaps at the other door, for she had another door into an alley, and so had made his escape and cheated them all. This was indeed probable enough, and the justice satisfied himself with giving her an oath that she had not received or admitted any man into her house to conceal him, or protect or hide him from justice. This oath she might justly take, and did so, and so she was dismissed. It is easy to judge what a fright I was in upon this occasion, and it was impossible for my governess ever to bring me to dress in that disguise again, for, as I told her, I should certainly betray myself. My poor partner in this mischief was now in a bad case, for he was carried away before my Lord Mayor, and by his worship committed to Newgate, and the people that took him were so willing as well as able to prosecute him, that they offered themselves to enter into reconnaissance to appear at the sessions, and pursue the charge against him. However, he got his indictment deferred, upon promise to discover his accomplices, and particularly the man that was concerned with him in his robbery. And he failed not to do his endeavour, for he gave in my name, whom he called Gabriel Spencer, which was the name I went by to him. And here appeared the wisdom of my concealing my name and sex from him, which, if he had ever known, I had been undone. He did all he could to discover this Gabriel Spencer. He described me, he discovered the place where he said I lodged, and, in a word, all the particulars that he could of my dwelling, but having concealed the main circumstances of my sex from him, I had a vast advantage, and he never could hear of me. He brought 2 or 3 families into trouble by his endeavouring to find me out, but they knew nothing of me, any more than that I had a fellow with me that they had seen, but knew nothing of. And as for my governess, though she was the means of his coming to me, yet it was done at second hand, and he knew nothing of her. This turned to his disadvantage, for having promised discoveries, but not being able to make it good, it was looked upon as trifling with the justice of the city, and he was the more fiercely pursued by the shopkeepers who took him. I was, however, terribly uneasy all this while, and that I might be quite out of the way, I went away from my governesses for a while, but not knowing whither to wander, I took a maidservant with me, and took the stage-coach to Dunstable, to my old landlord and landlady, where I had lived so handsomely with my Lancashire husband. Here I told her a formal story, that I expected my husband every day from Ireland, and that I had sent a letter to him that I would meet him at Dunstable at her house, and that he would certainly land, if the wind was fair, in a few days, so that I was come to spend a few days with him till he should come, for he was either come post or in the Westchester coach, I knew not which, but whichsoever it was, he would be sure to come to that house to meet me. My landlady was mighty glad to see me, and my landlord made such a stir with me that if I had been a princess I could not have been better used, and here I might have been welcome a month or 2 if I had thought fit. But my business was of another nature. I was very uneasy, though so well disguised that it was scarce possible to detect me, lest this fellow should somehow or other find me out, and though he could not charge me with this robbery, having persuaded him not to venture, and having also done nothing in it myself but run away, yet he might have charged me with other things, and have bought his own life at the expense of mine. This filled me with horrid apprehensions. I had no recourse, no friend, no confidant but my old governess, and I knew no remedy but to put my life in her hands, and so I did, for I let her know where to send to me, and had several letters from her while I stayed here. Some of them almost scared me out of my wits, but at last she sent me the joyful news that he was hanged, which was the best news to me that I had heard a great while. I had stayed here 5 weeks, and lived very comfortably indeed, the secret anxiety of my mind excepted, but when I received this letter I looked pleasantly again, and told my landlady that I had received a letter from my spouse in Ireland, that I had the good news of his being very well, but had the bad news that his business would not permit him to come away so soon as he expected, and so I was like to go back again without him. My landlady complimented me upon the good news, however, that I had heard he was well. "For I have observed, madam," said she, "you hadn't been so pleasant as you used to be." "You have been over head and ears in care for him, I dare say," says the good woman. "'Tis easy to be seen there's an alteration in you for the better," says she. "Well, I am sorry the esquire can't come," says my landlord. "I should have been heartily glad to have seen him. But I hope, when you have certain news of his coming, you'll take a step hither again, madam," says he. "You shall be very welcome whenever you please to come."